Hey guys, it's Hank here. I wanted to talk about Fukushima paralysis, something that affected me just a little bit ago, about 4 weeks ago. Well, initially, everybody knows probably at this point that subscribes to this channel knows I generally study economics and international affairs. And I've got a pretty good success rate at determining what the future outcomes of financial events and international events are probably going to be based on an aggregation of speculative analysis from a variety of different sources. Well, I'm always looking for new sources of information and better sources of information. And I happened to run across Fukushima. Now, I had run across it before, and it happened in 2011. The truth of the matter is, it is an absolute catastrophe, an ecological disaster that makes Chernobyl look very minimal in comparison, and it's still not controlled. 2011 this happened. Now, I didn't really start to use YouTube until 2014. And I'm very surprised at myself for not being able to dig out information about Fukushima earlier, not being able to understand the magnitude of the problem, and the fact that it's still unresolved, and the way that the information about Fukushima has been classified, and there's absolutely there's no national security interest in classifying that information. It's simply a cover-up. A cover-up on the magnitude. I thought 9/11 was really as bad as it could get. I thought 9/11 in my lifetime, I would never see anything so horrible ever perpetrated again. And Fukushima makes 9/11 pale in comparison, as far as the cover-up, the damage that's being done to people, and their inability to be able to find the real information out about it. And when I talk about Fukushima paralysis, like I say, at first it came upon the information, and when you search out a lot of information, you run across a lot of bullshit. People are always trying to make stuff up for their clickbait, their new headlines or whatever. People like Lisa Haven and just rumor mongers that sometimes are right. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. It's always kind of interesting to see what kind of rumor mill they're churning up, but they really don't have any. There's no real basis for what they're saying. There's no real truth in it, other than they're trying to intuit out the collective subjective unconscious of YouTube. So when I started to study it, I guess I was so shocked by it. My normalcy bias kind of kicked in, and I did a little research, and I saw this D News article that really leapt out at me, because I've got a very good bullshit detector. It's what helps me discover what's right and what's bullshit when you're looking for good sources of information among piles and piles and piles of information that grow every day. And it just leapt out at me as being bullshit. So I knew something was up, and I marked it, and I moved on. I went back into international affairs and economics for about 3 weeks. And I went back to it and discovered a YouTuber named Kevin D. Blanche. And he spoke with a passion that I knew I wasn't looking at bullshit. And I could see his creation. I could see the art that he had created. And I knew that it's too difficult to fake something like that. There's a level of difficulty in creating propaganda and bullshit that's believable. And through the war, what I call it's a war of information, essentially, is what we're engaged in right now. Information warfare. And it's just the truth versus copious amounts of bullshit that's being fed to people. And what you'll find is that it's very difficult in this war of attrition for propagandists to be able to successfully propagate. They rely on bots, they rely on search manipulation, they rely on a number of dirty tricks in order to reinforce their narrative. But eventually it fails because there's so much effort that needs to be put in when telling the truth is so much easier. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, if you always tell the truth, then you don't ever have to remember what you said, because it's not like you have to try and cover up the lie over and over and over again. So all these lies that are compounded become more and more transparent as more and more effort has to be put into lying to people, covering things up. So I revisited it, and when I started to it started to really sink into me. I started to understand the implications of what this meant, about the salmon populations crashing, about the ecological disaster that is now the Pacific Ocean, the fact that they can't even get robots into the reactors, and they built these new buildings over top of them just to keep the radioactive dust from going up in the air, shooting across the jet stream and hitting everybody on the West Coast hard again. And when you really start to think, oh my gosh, I'm standing probably here, possibly at the very end of humanity. Now, long ago, I understood that I was going to die, and that, death is part of life. It's part of the cycle of life. But I was horrified to think that I was part of a species that eradicated all the life on this planet. And that paralyzed me in a way that I couldn't complete my work. I immediately ceased making YouTube videos. I couldn't really, because it does take a lot of emotional awareness. You really need to, because I went through the stages first. Of course, there was denial. It can't be true. Then there's anger and depression and all this stuff, and I still haven't gotten around to accepting it yet. I don't accept it. I can't accept it. Nobody can. If you know what the truth is, you can't accept it, because it means that all life on Earth can be destroyed within the span of one lifetime. People love their end time prophecies and their doomsday, and every generation has embraced doomsday. I remember my great-grandmother thought the world was going to end in 86. So, everybody has their doomsday prophecy, but we're now actually confronted with something that we know is a tremendous environmental problem, and it's still being covered up. And why is it being covered up? It's because generally people that are in charge, they don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to be held responsible for these things, because they know that the backlash is going to be so severe when it comes. And I sat for 36 hours. I was 36 hours awake working on this problem, trying to figure out, okay, what can I do now? I felt paralyzed because I didn't have any solutions. What was my solution to deal with Fukushima? Well, I know a little bit about YouTube. I know a little bit about how the search engine works. I know a little bit about the way that it tries to forecast trends and channels and so on and so forth. I know about the bots that are being used. I know about the different account creations that are being used, or the 4 or 5 different accounts international shills will use. I can generally recognize a Russian. I can generally recognize a Eastern European. I can generally recognize a Korean, or somebody that's either Taiwanese or Chinese. I can generally recognize them by the patterns that they follow. When I look at them, and it takes a little bit of digging. You have to connect the dots to figure out who you're dealing with. But anyway, what I came up with for 36 hours, struggling with coming to terms with Fukushima, was platitudes from the 90s. Real life, big dog, no fear, balls hanging, Fuka-fucking-shima, baby. And let me explain what that means. I'm a hardcore libertarian. I really believe in freedom. I believe in extremely limited government. But there's a difference between liberty and just letting people run roughshod over you. Okay, so let me give you an example here. Somebody's operating a nuclear power plant that's irradiating you and all your neighbors. It's not libertarian to let them do that, because it doesn't make you more free. It doesn't give you liberty. It's destroying your life. It's destroying your liberty. You need to fight for your rights and fight for your freedom. That's what a libertarian believes. Libertarian doesn't leave it to the government. A libertarian doesn't leave it to anybody else. A libertarian accepts their responsibility in the world and does what they can to change it. But the reason that I use that platitude, real life, big dog, no fear, balls hanging, Fukushima baby, is when I was a kid growing up, those were the platitudes on every shirt. Those were the things that were worn by the outdoorsmen, people that often went off to war, people that have experience with firearms and experience with nature, and generally are nature lovers. And at this point, at this stage, people that wore those shirts in high school would have children now. So it was the audience that I was trying to reach, the audience that I understood I needed to reach. I need to reach now. Libertarians that are outdoorsmen, that love nature, and that love their children. And I think that's it should be fairly easy to find those people. It should be fairly easy, and let them know Fukushima is a real danger, and we're being lied to about it, and it's killing our way of life, and we can't tolerate it for very much longer. So the reason that I started to understand that I wasn't dealing with bullshit here is, first I was looking at Kevin D. Blanche. Okay, I understood he was an extremist, and extremism, when people are confronted with major problems, they lead the charge typically when they're very extreme. Now I'm a tactician, so I generally take my time to analyze a situation and try and approach things very calmly and rationally. I started to throw out little lines, like a fisherman would throw out a line and see what bites. The second source that I started to kind of look at more and more was strontium milks. And I could see a little bit of psychological manipulation going on there, but I do understand the by any means necessary way of trying to wake people up to the reality of Fukushima. I do understand that in an information warfare campaign, when you're dealing with so much suppression, that sometimes you do have to take a by any means necessary stance. I don't. I tend to try and operate within generally accepted social norms and rules, because so people can trust me. I can't be too extreme, because if I'm too extreme, people will dismiss it because it is extremist. The next, I started to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further, and I got to an artist that has only had a few subscribers, Thomas Ackerman, and I was impressed by the body of his work. Now, could he have been bullshitting me? Could he have been a guy that was just standing in a studio in front of different pieces of art and talking about Fukushima and other things like that? Well, real recognizes real, and I was listening very carefully to his ideas about truth and honesty, and I realized, okay, we have a real person here that's not bullshitting. It would be too hard for him to bullshit this, because that's not the kind of thing that propagandists, well, we're all propagandists in a sense, but a propagandist that is attempting to mislead you. Because the art was too real, the discussion was too real, and when he's talking about Fukushima, the linkage, it's too real. So kind of through that connection, I went on to look at a guy named Dana Durnford. And Dana Durnford had been smeared all over YouTube, absolutely smeared. And talk about a real fighter there. He's a warrior, an absolute warrior. So I encourage you to go and look at his body of work as well. And I guess there was one more influence that I wanted to mention about Fukushima that's escaping me right at present. So it's not terribly important. I want you guys right here that are watching my channel too to be aware of something called a psyop. There are psyops that are actually out there. Now, the way that YouTube works, all right, I'll make this a second video. I'll let you know how YouTube works here and how the beast, we feed the beast. Now, this video has been called Fukushima Paralysis. It's been Hank. I'm out.